In a bustling hospital in the heart of the city, Doctor Charles Mbatha, a well-known but arrogant surgeon, prided himself on his spotless reputation. His sharp wit and quick hands made him a brilliant doctor, but his attitude toward his colleagues, especially those he considered beneath him, was far from commendable. Today, his target was Nurse Aisha, an albino woman who had joined the hospital only a few months ago. As they stood in front of a patient in the examination room, Charles barely glanced at the nurse before launching into his tirade. "You should double-check everything, Nurse Aisha. This is a professional place. Are you even qualified for this job?" His words sliced through the air like a scalpel. Aisha, whose calm demeanor hid the hurt swelling within her, kept her head down and didn't respond. She was used to his mockery, but today, something felt different. The patient lying on the bed, seemingly asleep, shifted slightly as though hearing every word. The hospital staff had grown accustomed to Charles's caustic remarks, but the atmosphere changed when Nurse Aisha left the room. The patient, a man in his late 50s, finally opened his eyes. His gaze was cold and calculating. Though he seemed frail, something in his demeanor suggested he was more than just an average patient. Charles dismissed him with a casual glance, still high on the adrenaline of belittling his subordinate. He didn't notice the patient watching him, silently assessing the situation. Aisha retreated to the break room, trying to compose herself. She had grown accustomed to working under pressure, but Charles's consistent mistreatment weighed on her. Her thoughts raced as she wondered if it was because of her skin condition or something else entirely. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a skilled professional, and she had earned her place in that hospital. But it seemed like no matter how hard she worked, Charles always found a way to undermine her in front of patients. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, taking a deep breath. Back in the examination room, the patient's eyes were locked on Charles, but the doctor remained oblivious. He scribbled some notes on the chart, barely acknowledging the man. The patient finally spoke, his voice gravelly yet authoritative. "You shouldn't treat people like that, doctor. You never know who's watching." Charles, irritated by the unsolicited advice, laughed it off. "I'm here to treat you, not to listen to lectures. Save your energy." Days passed, and Charles continued his routine, belittling Nurse Aisha every chance he got. However, strange things began happening around the hospital. Files went missing, important appointments were rescheduled without explanation, and patients who were supposed to be transferred never made it to their destinations. The staff became uneasy, whispering about some sort of conspiracy. Aisha, though still quiet, noticed these changes and became increasingly suspicious of the new patient who had been staying longer than expected. His eyes always seemed to follow her when she entered the room. One afternoon, after another humiliating confrontation in front of a different patient, Aisha decided she'd had enough. She resolved to speak with the hospital administration. As she walked toward the office, she felt a presence behind her. She turned and saw the mysterious patient standing in the hallway, watching her with an expression that sent chills down her spine. "Be careful who you trust," he said, before walking away, his words cryptic but unsettling. The tension in the hospital escalated as the days wore on. The patient, now a regular presence in the halls, had started speaking in vague, threatening riddles to various staff members, especially those who mistreated Aisha. Charles, too focused on his own career ambitions, ignored the whispers of strange happenings. He was too confident in his reputation to care about rumors. However, when his office was broken into and personal documents were scattered, he began to wonder if he had made an enemy. One evening, as the hospital quieted down, Charles received an unexpected visitor. It was the mysterious patient, now walking without assistance, his posture commanding. "I've been watching you, doctor. You think you're untouchable, but everyone has a weakness." The patient's voice was steady, cold. Charles scoffed, standing from his desk. "What are you talking about? You're just a patient here." But there was something unnerving in the patient's eyes, something that made Charles feel uneasy for the first time. Aisha, meanwhile, was conducting her rounds when she overheard a conversation between two senior doctors. They were discussing a powerful figure who had been admitted under a false identity for reasons unknown. Rumors had it that this man had deep connections with both the government and the criminal underworld. The pieces began to fall into place. The patient wasn't who he claimed to be. But why was he watching her so closely? In the following days, Aisha noticed Charles becoming more paranoid. His usual confidence was replaced by a nervous energy. He would glance over his shoulder constantly, as though expecting someone to appear. The patient's cryptic words echoed in his mind, but he refused to believe he was in danger. One night, after another exhausting day, he returned to his office to find a letter on his desk. The envelope was unmarked, but inside was a single sentence: "Your actions will come back to haunt you." Charles finally confronted the patient, demanding answers. The patient smiled, a sinister curve to his lips. "You've humiliated and demeaned those around you, doctor. People like you think they can act without consequence. But I'm here to remind you of one simple fact. Everyone answers to someone." Charles' heart raced, but he couldn't let this man intimidate him. "I'm the one in charge here. You're just a patient." The patient chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "Am I?" The next day, the hospital was thrown into chaos. A high-profile figure had gone missing from his private room, and it was none other than the mysterious patient. No one knew where he had gone or how he had managed to leave without being seen. Security footage showed nothing unusual, but the staff was on edge. Rumors spread like wildfire, and many began to question what was really happening in the hospital. Aisha, though shaken by the disappearance, felt an odd sense of clarity. She realized that the patient had been trying to warn her all along. Charles had wronged too many people, and now the consequences were catching up with him. As she prepared for her shift that evening, she received an anonymous message on her phone. "Thank you for staying true to yourself. You'll be rewarded soon." Charles, now frantic, tried to control the situation. He called in favors, reached out to colleagues, and tried to erase any trace of wrongdoing, but the walls were closing in. The final blow came when hospital administration received a detailed report, exposing years of malpractice, including the doctor's mistreatment of staff. To his horror, Charles discovered that the patient had been no ordinary man. He was a high-ranking government official, investigating corruption within the hospital, and Nurse Aisha, the woman he had consistently humiliated, had unknowingly become the key witness in the case. In the end, Charles was removed from his position, his reputation shattered. The hospital staff breathed a collective sigh of relief, though they would never forget the strange events surrounding the patient who disappeared without a trace. As for Aisha, she received a promotion and the respect she had always deserved. But the anonymous message still lingered in her mind, a reminder that in the shadows someone was always watching.